Hello. Yeah, that's fine. Hello, this is Anand. Uh, Distinct guests, esteemed dignitaries, colleagues from international ideas, experts, and friends. It is my great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all of you to this important international conference on reimagining democracy for future, democracy in 2050, organized by India International Institute of Democracy and Election Management, called Triple IDM. India is proud to hold the chairship of the Council of Member of States of International IDEA for 2026. This chairship, uniquely led by Election Commission of India, brings the practitioner perspective to the world's largest and most diverse democracy to the global stage. Triple IDM, established by Election Commission of India in 2011 as a global resource center for democracy and election management, is proudly serving as the nodal agency for the chairship. Our theme for the chairship, Democracy for an Inclusive, Peaceful, Resilient and Sustainable World, is deeply rooted in India's civilizational ethos of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family. It reflects our commitment to the sharing not only lessons from India's vibrant democratic journey, but also democratic values enshrined in our ancient heritage. While focusing on inclusive, resilient, and sustainable development, this chairship serves as a powerful platform for collective international stewardship. By combining Election Commission of India's leadership and Triple IDM's convening strength with international ideas global expertise, we aim to create a laboratory for democratic and electoral innovation. Our efforts rest on two key thematic pillars. First is reimagining democracy for future, and second is independent and professional election management bodies for sustainable democracy. Today's conference focuses on one of the important priorities under the first pillar, democracy in 2050. This initiative encourages policymakers and institutional leaders to design democratic systems that are future ready. It seeks to provide a future forward-looking platform for us to collectively envision democracy as a driver for peace, inclusion, sustainability, and resilience. A world where no one is left behind, where differences are resolved through dialogue, and where institutions are strong enough to navigate climate challenges and technological disruptions through adaptive and responsive governance. While this, I invite our moderator, Emma, and its distinguished speakers, and our Honorable Director General Sri Rakesh Kumarji. We look forward to your active engagement and contribution to shaping a shared vision for democracy in 2050. Thank you. Let the deliberations begin. Sir, we call upon DG sir on the stage to give a opening statement. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Distinguished speakers, moderator of the session, guests, delegates, our partners, and everyone who's connected virtually and in this room. I extend a very warm welcome to everyone to this opening session of 2 days conference, which is around one of our key thematic priority, which is reimagining democracy for future, democracy in 2050. So as my speaker just introduced, India is currently chairing the Council of Member States of International IDEA, and so and this chairship is led by Chief Election Commissioner, Election Commission of India on behalf of India, which is also a very unique arrangement in recognition of the fact that Election Commission of India has built an unparalleled legacy of more than 75 years of conducting the elections in such a large and diverse democracy. The India International Institute of Democracy and Election Management is set up by Election Commission of India, and with the purpose of training, capacity building, research and advocacy. So we are helping the Election Commission of India in this chairship and guiding most of the thematic priorities in partnership with International IDEA. I have a brief presentation just to set the context for this particular workshop and our thematic priority. So if we, I think we had changed. This is, I had shared in the group. So any case, this priority reflects our work. This priority reflects our work on this particular theme, reimagining democracy for future, looking at several aspects. Democracy is represented by systems, forms, processes, but we're also looking at what are the deliverables that democracy is expected to achieve. What are the outcomes that we are looking at? And that's where our overarching theme for the chairship and the four pillars of deliverables: inclusion, peace, resilience, and sustainability. We also look at what has succeeded so far, what are the areas of lesser weakness, what are the opportunities, where, and also the threats that we must be aware of. We also look at what are the pathways to improvement, how do we move forward. There are countries at different levels of maturity, different levels of practice, different levels of system. So that's another important aspect that as part of our thematic work we will be covering. And then looking at key drivers of change, and how do we leverage them, and also the pitfalls of some of these drivers of change which can adversely impact. Can we have the other slides? So this is not this. So like I said, this priority is chosen. So we have two thematic pillars. One is about independent and professional election management bodies, which we think are fundamental to sustainable democracy. And the second is the democratic future itself. So reimagining democratic future, and also looking at how democracy has delivered on the promise. So the reimagining democracy for 2050 will look at how the democracy has been successful. I mean, we are all aware of many pitfalls of democracy where it has failed to deliver, where the institutions have failed, the leaders have failed. But then there are plenty of stories of success. There are many areas where we have delivered, and it's very important for us to highlight those cases, highlight those success stories, build trust and confidence of the stakeholders, of youth, of citizens for whom we, and also develop global perspective. Our focus within the overall global perspective is also to look at global south, because the challenges being faced in this part of the world are also very unique, both democracy and development. So it's very important that we have clarity as to what are the kind of challenges which democracy is expected to address, and develop perspective which are suited both in the local and global context. And when we look at the future, we must learn from the past. We must also make sure that we are conscious of what are the demands of future, and build our institutions, build our processes, build our policies accordingly. And the long-term governance, another issue is the democracy becomes cyclic and the cycles are reducing. So how do you overcome the negative impact of the short-term vision, the short-term planning that happens vis-a-vis long-term governance? So coming back, how do you, democracy is known by representation, rights, participation, justice, but also we need to look at what is the end result that we are achieving. What is to the, the society that we are going to deliver, what we are going to deliver to individuals. So at a very top level, we are looking at these four pillars. Inclusion, which means that all individuals, irrespective of the background, irrespective of their status, are treated as equal. They are integrated into system. They are heard and valued. Peace, again, both at the local level, at regional level, and also at the global level, how does democracy deliver on a peaceful society? What mechanisms and what institutions can really help us achieve through democratic processes and systems peace in the society? Resilience. We also understand that we live in a world which has a lot of uncertainty. There are ups and downs in all areas, whether it's the pandemic that we faced, where it is the financial instability that we faced, where the emerging new technologies and the ill effects of some of those technologies. So how do we prepare? How can democracy prepare itself for delivering on resilience, a resilient society? And then sustainability, biggest of all, the challenge that we face. Are we moving on a development path which is sustainable? And are we looking at that in a holistic way? And that's where the sustainable development goals, which represent a consensus of all countries, have been laid out. How does democracy enables delivery of sustainable development goals? So at a very broad level, we are looking at these 4 deliverables. We feel they are very comprehensive. They cover various aspects of individual and social aspiration. And that's where we would like to work and build our report and the recommendations. So we are looking at the deliverables of inclusion, peace, resilience, and sustainability. So how does democracy deliver? So which are the democratic processes, which are the democratic principles, which are the democratic systems which lead to different, again, these are all cross-cutting, they are overlapping, but just to have some more clarity looking at how inclusion can be achieved through political participation, through representation, through legal rights, civic engagement, inclusive service delivery. So we need to look at these democratic processes. How do we strengthen them to ensure our delivery on inclusion? Similarly, if you look at peace, how do we develop a process of dialogue, dispute resolution, which is non-violent? How do we accommodate more social divisions? How do we evolve norms of peaceful resolution so that democratic institutions, democratic policies, and the processes can lead to peace? Similarly, for resilience, we need to look at a governance which is more adaptive, which is flexible, which takes into account the civil society and builds on their support system and is transparent. So these democratic processes, ideals help us achieve resilience. Sustainability, again, how do you leverage democratic processes and institutions to ensure sustainable development? That's again the processes, democratic processes and the principles of accountability, transparency, rule of law, evidence-based decision making, long-term planning. These could lead to more sustainable outcomes for the society. Looking at 2050, what kind of world we are looking at, what do we expect our democracy to deliver for us as we transport ourselves in 2050? Again, looking at all the 4 broad pillars in terms of inclusion. Obviously, these are all a bit of rhetoric and bit of utopian, but that's where we need to really look at. That's the ideal we would like to democracy to achieve, and that the democratic system has that beauty. It has empowered individuals to look at equal. It has empowered everyone for those aspirations. So the first premise is that if you're looking at inclusion, we need to make sure that everyone feels part of the world. No one should feel left behind. All systems, all processes, everything has to be developed in a way where we assure of every individual that he is part of the process, he is part of the society, he is part of the delivery. Peace, again, everyone has to feel secure, both in terms of his local context and global context. Resilience, we need to develop that capacity where society can feel and address the uncertainties, rather than being overwhelmed by them or causing a major disruption. We should have a society, we should have which has resilience, which can withstand the change, the uncertainties in the world. And also we need a world where humanity lives in balance with nature. So looking at it again, that's left to the are these sessions to deliberate and the experts, to policymakers. Where have we succeeded? You know, democracy obviously leads to immediate political participation and civic engagement. It does come very naturally wherever democracy has gone. The rule of law and transparency does get established, and we do get, because of the engagement with citizens, because of the engagement with civil society, a more resilience in the society. But then there are also weaknesses that probably need to be addressed. We need to be aware, we need to strengthen our system for future, where we can deal with political uncertainties, we could deal with corruption, we could make sure that the institutions perform what they are expected to perform. We also enhance the capacity of the state to really deliver on the promises. You know, the institution, the state, and the larger organizational structures which deliver value to the citizens. The opportunities, again, the digital governance, that's something which has fundamentally changed the rules of the game. You know, the way we today empower citizens by way of technology, both access to internet and access to content, that holds immense promise for our future delivery. We also have youth leadership, particularly in the global south, let's say a country like India, which is increasingly going to be younger and younger, and that is where the potential is. They have those aspirations, they have that hunger, they're getting talents. So how do we leverage that to make sure that whatever weaknesses we have in the system, we are able to overcome? The green transition, we've realized that the development model that we have adopted in the past is not necessarily going to yield us good in the future. So we need to course correct that, and that's also an opportunity to create more jobs, more economic development, and more sustainable growth. Some of the threats that we need to be aware, one is obviously which the information environment, and that's where, particularly propelled by artificial intelligence, it might create a lot of distortion, disruption, and we must find way of responsible use of AI, responsible governance. Climate and social fragmentation, there is a lot of awareness, there is a lot of consensus around it, but still I think it needs, we need to be aware that our policies, our institutions need to be more proactive in addressing these challenges. External election interference also, because of driven by AI, driven by many other consideration, and since the elections constitute the foundation for democracy, it's very important that we ensure that electoral integrity is maintained at all costs. So when we're looking at some pathways, some roadmap for reimagining democracy and what we all need to do, uh, you know, we as a group would be looking at where it has delivered success, where we have proven models of success, proven case studies. How can others use that? How can we replicate them? How can we scale them at, somewhere it may have happened at the local level, can it become national? Somewhere it may have happened at the national level, can it become regional? Somewhere it may have succeeded at regional level, can it become global? So a lot of effort is required to look at what has succeeded and let's build on the success. And the second is equally important. If some places there is gap, we have not been able to really build that success, how do we continuously improve upon that? How do we strengthen those systems? How do we improve those systems? And that's where our work should be focused. And obviously we need to be aware and response to the future. Whatever the challenges that are going to come our way, we need to find ways, we need to be aware, we need to build partnerships, we need to build solutions which can really make sure that we offer a good response to the threats that we might have in future. And we must leverage all the drivers of positive change, what we have, like I said, in terms of youth leadership, youth energy, in terms of digitalization, data-driven governance. These are huge. In case we are able to channelize them, if we are able to really build a roadmap for them and they feel involved in democracy, democratic institution, there are huge transformation which can be brought about. Again, democracy and deliverables that we are talking about, there is a symbiotic cycle. As we achieve peace, inclusion, resilience, and sustainability, it also strengthens democratic processes. It also strengthens participation. It strengthens rule of law. It strengthens individual dignity. So we need to look at both of them together as we look at democratic processes, democratic forms, achieving better outcomes on those processes, forms and institutions. We also need to reinforce them with the deliverables that we are talking about. So understanding that, and none of them should be thought in isolation, that we achieve something in isolation about the processes, and some of us do measure the success of democracy only in terms of form and processes, which may be a half-baked story. We need to look at the full spectrum, where there are forms, institution, representation, but also deliverables. What is being delivered to the citizen year on year, month on month, whether it is housing for him, whether it is water for him, whether it is electricity for him, whether it is road for him. How do we put the full spectrum before us when we look at what democracy has been able to deliver, what is democracy achieving for us? So key drivers of change, I'm sure there are sessions around it. There will be experts and others will be talking how AI and information technology, the kind of profound impact it can have. Democracy was all about transparency, about sharing. Earlier you had no means, even if you wanted, if you wished, if you had intention, but there was little that you could have done. Today, with social media, with the kind of platforms we have, the kind of tools we have, every person can run his own channel, every person can broadcast whatever he wants to. So the kind of empowerment we had thought by law, technology has given him. Obviously there are regulations and there are limitations, but I'm thinking, what could be achieved by way of technology and this progress is tremendous. Similarly, the youth, the kind of demographics we have at this time, as I said, particularly in the global south, if they are directed well, if they are coached well, if they are guided well, we can achieve tremendously. Migration and diversity, again, there are both positive and negative. We need to look at it very carefully. Climate and sustainability, and some of the pitfalls of economic transformation that we need to be aware of. This is the last slide. Again, when you're looking at pathways, everyone's journey, every country's journey has to be different. It will have to take into account where they are, how their systems and processes are, because within even broad spectrum of democracy, there are different levels of development, there are different levels of existence. So, it's very difficult to say that one global model for pathways ahead can be there. So we need to be aware, and probably each country needs to move in a gradual fashion from a basic foundation where there are core democratic institutions in place, rule of law and basic service delivery, moving to the next level where we have been able to decentralize the function which can be handled at the local level, where we have brought technology in the mainstream, and where we have expanded civic engagement to a last pinnacle where we have reached citizens as active partners, and where our outcomes are inclusive and we have lasting democratic values. So these are some of the thoughts. This is some of the context for our thematic work, and I hope the 8 sessions that we have over 2 days will give us a lot of ideas, and it will help us put together thoughts for our thematic work and the report that we are preparing. Thank you.
We thank our Honorable DG Sir
Democratic systems across the world are navigating a rapidly changing.
We thank our Honorable DG Sir for setting the tone for the broader conference, and also setting the contours for our discussion and deliberation forward. And here on, there will be a short video, snippets for capturing whole of things in a very short and attractive manner. Please play.
Democratic systems across the world are navigating a rapidly changing landscape shaped by technological advancements, evolving societal realities, and emerging global transformation. As the world moves towards 2050, there is a growing need to envision democratic systems that are resilient, adaptable, and capable of responding to future opportunities and challenges. Under India's chairship of the Council of Member States of International IDEA 2026, the India International Institute of Democracy and Election Management (IIIDM) is organizing a 2-day international conference on reimagining democracy for the future, democracy in 2050. on 11th and 12th June 2026 at its campus in New Delhi. Inspired by the principle of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is family, the conference seeks to create a forward-looking platform where policymakers, democratic institutions, practitioners, researchers, and experts can collectively envision democracy as a driver for peaceful and resilient future. Conference approaches democracy not only as a political or electoral system but also as a framework capable of delivering meaningful outcomes for societies. The discussions will focus on strengthening democracy's ability to deliver across four interconnected dimensions: inclusion, peace, resilience, and sustainable development. The conference will further explore pathways that strengthen democratic innovation, institutional adaptability, and future-ready governance towards democracy in 2050. Join us as we collectively reimagine democracy for the future.
I hope you like the creativity and also the content in it, and it was really impressive video. And moving forward, I invite Emma to take over the session and let the deliberation begin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anand, for that kind introduction. And it's really great to see you all here, both to those in person as well as those tuning in online. Um, it's my pleasure to be moderating this session today on reimagining democracy for the future, visions for democracy in 2050. Before introducing our distinguished speakers and panelists, I would briefly like to just set the scene for today's discussion. At a time of democratic backsliding, rising uncertainty, and growing criticism of existing systems of governance, this session invites us to look beyond the immediate challenges and imagine what democracy in 2050 should and could look like. Across the world, we're confronting multiple challenges: polarization, rising inequality, technological disruption, just to name a few. And at the same time, we are seeing that people are more connected, more aware and informed, and being vocal in demanding accountability and dignity and participation in political life. The outstanding question before us today is, what kind of democratic future do we want to build? And one that is really leveraging the leadership of global South actors. Democracy, as mentioned, is not only elections. At its best, it aspires to create societies that are inclusive, participative, and sustainable and resilient. To explore this, this session is organized across the four interconnected aspirations, as Rakesh Verma kindly went over. Very Firstly, we will examine inclusion and whether democracy in 2050 can indeed help create societies where no one is left behind, ensuring equitable access to things like education, healthcare, employment, and people's participation in public life. Second, we're also interested in the relationship between democracy and peace, and whether democracies of the future can really foster societies where conflict is resolved through dialogue or mediation. And then finally, we will consider sustainability and resilience, and whether democracy in 2050 can really support a world that balances economic development with these climate challenges while also addressing inequality. Ultimately, it's hoped that these discussions will provide inspiration as to what are the next steps or priorities for actions for countries going forward. And by reflecting on these visions, the proposed reforms, policies, or partnerships that are needed to achieve them, we hope to be able to shape and create a more positive future. And with that, it's now my honor to introduce you to our speakers before we get into the discussion. First up, we have Professor Ashok Acharya, who serves as a professor in the Department of Political Science and director of the Delhi School of Transnational Affairs at the University of Delhi. He earned his PhD from the University of Toronto and is the co-editor of the widely used textbook Political Theory and Introduction, and editor of Citizenship in a Globalizing World. His research and publications focus on democracy, multiculturalism, social justice, affirmative action, citizenship, constitutionalism, and global justice. Professor Acharya has received several prestigious fellowships and scholarships, including the Commonwealth Scholarship and the Monk Doctoral Fellowship at the University of Toronto. He's also been a fellow at the Australian Academy of Social Sciences, India Fellow at the University of Birmingham, and Henry Hart Rice Visiting Professor at Yale University. His research interests include comparative and contemporary political theory, ethics, politics, democracy, and constitutionalism. So welcome, Professor Ashok Acharya. I might just go over the other speakers before inviting you to the podium. Next, we will also have Graham Matenga, who will be joining us online. Graham serves as a regional head of programs for Africa and West Asia at International IDEA, where he oversees the program delivery, strategic partnerships, and business development and regional coordination within that region. He works closely with the regional director to strengthen International IDEA's strategic positioning and impact across the region. Previously, Graham has served as head of the Kenya office and regional thematic lead on political participation and representation, leading initiatives on citizen engagement, democratic accountability, political parties, parliaments, women and youth participation, and political finance. His extensive experience also includes managing UNDP governance and peace-building programs in Zimbabwe, and serving with the National Democratic Institute on elections and citizen participation programs across places like Angola, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and South Sudan. In addition to this, he's also worked as a governance advisor and program manager with several international NGOs in places like Somaliland, Jamaica, South Sudan, and Zimbabwe. And last but not least, who will also be joining us online, we have Dr. Jagannath Panda, who is also a leading Indian strategic affairs expert specializing in East Asian security, China-India relations, and Indo-Pacific geopolitics. He is the head of the Stockholm Center for South Asian and Indo-Pacific Affairs at the Institute for Security and Development Policy, ISDP. He also serves as a professor at the University of Warsaw and holds research affiliations with HCSS in the Netherlands, YCAPS, CIGS in Japan. He's also a prolific author, and his publications include India-China relations. Dr. Panda has testified before the US Congress and also spent 15 years as a fellow at India's premier strategic think tank, IDSA. Each speaker will have approximately 15 minutes to present, which will then be followed by a 30-minute discussion and a Q&A session from the audience. We invite you to add your questions to the chat for those of you online, or jot them down here in the room when the time comes for the Q&A. And we have quite a few sessions to get through today, so I will respectfully be keeping time to ensure that we get the chance to hear from everyone. And with that, I would like to welcome Professor Acharya to this podium. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Emma Kenny, for this very kind and generous introduction. Thanks to IIIDM and to the Director General, Mr. Verma, for throwing open a very constructive and a very interesting conference. And I really congratulate IIIDM and the Director General, Mr. Verma, for taking up the chairship of the International IDEA for this year. This indeed is something to look forward to in terms of outputs, not just from IIIDM, but from many of the other collaborative, partners all around the world, the DEM bodies that are working over time on and managing and maintaining elections, and also the functioning of democracy in many parts of the world. So I know that I have a limited time, and I chose after a long time, not to come with any kind of a presentation. So uh, and so what I want to do, what I choose to do, and basically I would like to provoke you to think along a few lines and to think along a few things that we want to unravel in terms of what we understand are the contemporary concerns regarding democracy today. And there are plenty of them. We can't go into each one of them, but there is a but the very title that we are trying to reimagine democracy for the future, and something when we talk about democracy in 2050, sounds somewhat utopian, right? That there is a utopia, but a utopia can be of two kinds. There can be a long-term utopia, and there is a short-term utopia. So something that is holding up in the next 24 years is something that we can call a short-term utopia, something like more like a realistic utopia, but not the long-term one. But who can ever understand what a short-term utopia looks like unless and until we also have an understanding of what the long-term utopia is all about, right? So we keep comparing the different heights of the different mountain peaks, keeping in view Mount Everest, and then we say, okay, so there are other, and then they fall short of the Mount Everest by these many feet and all that. So a utopian vision for democracy is is a given. We just cannot extricate democracy out of utopia. However, if you have noticed that in the last century, so we have to take some lessons of what happened in the last century, 20th century. So 20th century was also an age, like it was a century of ideological conflicts between different ideologies, between different competing political regimes. And towards the end, I think we thought democracy had won the battle. And right in 21st century, we raise our eyebrows and we are not so sure if democracy has indeed won, on what kind of democracy has won, right? So, but if you look back at 20th century, we know that there have been many ideologies that were competing, and almost all of them also presented us with utopias, different kinds of utopias, right? So there was a socialism that had its own utopia, and there was theocratic utopias, and there were fascist utopias. So there were so many utopias that many leaders and very charismatic leaders gave to the world, and democracy had to fight with all those utopias to establish its own utopia. And the democratic utopia, at that point of time, the thought regarding democracy centered around some people who felt that it should distance itself from all utopian thinking. That utopia takes us in a direction where we end up in authoritarian regimes, and we should be wary of people like Hitler, Mussolini, and all that, and we should stay away from them. And so, as a result of which, we must build, and that was the thinking. For much of 20th century, the thinking was that we should build on, a model of democracy which is minimalist, where we try to strengthen some of the core institutions, including the elections, having free and fair elections, have a minimalist version of democracy, and then that is how we strengthen democracy itself. And we shouldn't have too much of a focus on what can democracies deliver, because that is where the problem lay. Because socialism promised more than what democracies can deliver. Fascism promised a different kind of a delivery system. So much of the thinking in democracy was that stay away from utopian visions, because they are a call to some kind of a danger. But democracies endured, and with it, and around the turn of the century, and even now, we have a different kind of a understanding of democracy, that democracies cannot indeed do without utopias. We need a utopia. But the democratic utopia is a different thing altogether. So that will help us somewhere reimagine democracy for the future. And that is one of the perennial understanding of democracy that stays with us, with all our readings, with all our understanding, that And this is something many societies fail to understand, that democracy, at the heart of democracy, is the idea of disagreement. Without, without understanding that disagreement lies at the heart of democracy and how do we strengthen democracy, we cannot be thinking about deliverables as such. How do we ensure peace? How do we ensure inclusion? How do we ensure sustainability? But there is a little more to that. So there is, democracy works with disagreement, with diversity of opinions, but also brings up certain kind of mechanisms that also bring in all those diverse opinions in order to enlarge the systems of what we call participatory governance. Unfortunately, as a result of the 20th century thinking, many democracies have felt that once you choose a government into being, your job as a citizen stops. And this is something that if many of you may have come across the name of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote once that the English are free only once in 5 years, that is when they vote. And for the rest of the 5 years, they have ceded their freedom as citizens, and they are never freed after that. And that seems to be the outcome in almost many places. So the thinking, unfortunately, is that you elect your government and then cease participating. So how do we ensure participation towards inclusion, even sustainability? This is something on which many of our democratic theorists and also those who are practicing democracy or who are theorizing democratic practices have come around to. So there are a couple of things, that if I would just mention a few of them, and not in particular order. One of them is that, that beyond elections and the electoral bodies that we have, there is a room which is often forgotten and often glossed over, is that there should be some very localized deliberative bodies where citizens are able to speak directly to the public officials, speak to the government, participate in budget making, which unfortunately has been usurped by technocrats and experts. This is a big failing of democracy. Democracy can only reach out and include people, not just in a tokenistic manner of saying that, yeah, you belong to this category, you have the right to vote, which in many cases also they lose that. So people are, de facto disenfranchised in many cases. But that's not the issue. The issue is that, okay, so how do we enlarge our deliberative bodies? In many countries, what happens is that some of the most contentious issues are not debated even in the parliament. They are pushed to the Supreme Court. And that's not a great thing happening to a democracy, right? When you allow the courts to decide on matters of public importance. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a lot of thinking. China, which is not even a democracy, is experimenting with deliberation at the local level, as I find out from some of my friends who work on China, but Chinese who are settled outside of China, not inside China. So they work on these deliberative assemblies. I think, I would urge upon, IIIDM to undertake some such, collaborative research on trying to see the potential and the promise of some of the deliberative structures that we can think, we could generate around the world, and especially to begin at a local level in the Indian case. So on the one hand, we have these deliberative mechanisms that need to be understood, and understanding of their practices needs to be deepened, because that's the only way we provide depth to the idea of the demos in a democracy. So that the demos has a certain depth, can only be unleashed by giving them a more deliberative, opportunity. So we need to expand deliberation. But beyond that, and along with that, is the whole thing, and which is on what I guess most of the democracy and electoral management bodies are working on, is how do we design inclusive institutions. And for that, I think, none other than the democracy and election management bodies are better suited to suggest, good and workable reforms on how do we design inclusive institutions. But the word design now has penetrated almost in a multidisciplinary manner in almost all the disciplines and almost all the things, on almost all the themes that affect us. So if we have a design democracy, we also have a design ethics model, and and they all go together. They all go together. So how do we design inclusive institutions? This is something also that is not completely separate or separable from the idea of deliberation. The third thing, I think, what is happening, and this is where I will try to, although I had a lot more to speak about, but I will stop here after this, and that is our technology. Democracies, wherever they prosper, and every country has its own trajectory of success, failures, and all that, and it's a mixed bag almost everywhere. No one country can say that it's been completely successful or that democracies have been complete failure, unlike in some countries which have become completely dictatorial after having tasted democracy for a while. So technology has changed in many ways a couple of things. How many institutions you may design, but at the end of the day, democracy is also all about empowering an individual sense of agency. Institutions can never replace agency, right? So a person who can speak for himself, even if it is against all the considered opinion of his own society, needs to be heard. And that's the magic of democracy, and that's where its attractiveness and distinctiveness lies, right? So, but the ways in which our technologies are shaping us, it is a fact that many of those individual voices have been drowned in this kind of swathes of counter misinformation, disinformation campaigns that happen all around us, and then many of the citizens find themselves that they are trapped within certain echo chambers, filter bubbles, where they either agree with people, or if they disagree, then they are thrown out of those social media platforms, and so people have, as a result of which, people have become silent. It is, of course, so this is one of the problems of technology. So there is a technology of despair, but there is also a technology of hope. So technology cuts both ways. So there is what we might call a digital utopianism and a digital dystopianism. So there can be a digital dystopianism about which we have spoken enough, and at one earlier occasion I had come to IIIDM to speak more about digital dystopianism and utopianism, about the relationship between AI and democracy, and that is where I was looking at the ethics aspect. But even there, I have a few things to say, but only when time allows. But however, I would like to say that even how do we harness technology in order to make ourselves more hopeful about inclusion, peace, and all that, we have to really understand it. But beyond that, there is also something more that we need to understand. It's also about the success of a democracy is also the success of the values of a given society. If you are talking about peace, let's also remember that Michael Doyle, who once claimed that democracies do not go to war with each other, I don't think he would retract his statement now, because somebody, a leader in a very powerful democratic country, has actually gone to war and threatens to go to war at the drop of a hat, right? And so we really don't know, that how does the world cope with such democratically elected leaders? And the demos that we are now talking about is not just a demos of a particular country. We are actually looking at the demos, the world is a family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. If that is true, then actually we all have stakes in who gets to be elected to be the president of this or that country. We all have stakes because who knows, someday something would be thrust upon you by way of tariffs and wars and all those things, and we have lots at issue and stake here. So so if you expand the idea of a stakeholder understanding of democracy, then all the citizens of this world also have a say, and a very powerful say, in who gets to become the president of which or which country. It doesn't mean that we all need to vote, but what I'm trying to say is that the technology has also enlarged and expanded the idea of demos. No country can survive as a democracy long enough if it is surrounded by dictatorships all around. So, it is in the interest of all democracies to mutually help each other and to acknowledge each other's strengths and to build upon them. So, we do not exist in an environment where we only think about ourselves, democracy in this nation state, democracy in that nation state. So we also exist in a global environment which, if not conducive to democracy or democratic thinking, or if it can free itself us from some of those leadership issues, then we are safe. And in that case, even technologies of hope and despair cannot counter the problems that values bring in. So there is a technology of hope and despair, and we have to work on some of the positive sides that technology gives us. But I fear, and here I step back, to say that to try thinking of democracy as that it should be producing this and these variables only may not fetch much, unless and until we step back a little to say, how do we deepen and provide depth to our understanding of democracy, and then look at how that can be mustered, step by step in all these different directions. Because, I would be a little skeptical about an outcome-centric understanding of democracy. I would still say that procedures make a good democracy. And if you are talking about outcomes, then we have to be very open about it. So here it is. Democratic utopia is an open-ended utopia, which, if it wants to engage with the future generations, and in the Indian case, for instance, where, almost like 40 to 45% of the population is below 25 years, and they have a huge stake in the future. Maybe that population and that generation will ask us to rethink many of the values that we think we could safely impose on them. We may not. So there are many values about social justice and all that needs a rethink, especially if you are looking at an intergenerational justice. So these are some of the thoughts, and rather, if you put them all together, you might concur that these are all a set of very confusing thoughts. But I was just trying to open this and provide a little bit of a depth to coming to terms with how might we try to re-engage some of the very themes that we are all congregated here to address. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Acharya. That was very inspiring, and I think will provide some rich content for the discussions later. I now invite Graham Matenga, who will be joining us online, to speak. Please go ahead, Graham.
Thank you very much, Emma. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me, Emma?
Yes, Graham, we can hear you. You can start your presentation accordingly. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Our distinguished participants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Well, it's a privilege to contribute to this important session on reimagining democracy for the future, vision for democracy in 2050. And I think the question before us is not simply whether democracy will survive by 2050. The more important question is what kind of democracy will be legitimate, trusted, inclusive, and effective enough to respond to the world that is emerging. And thank you very much, Professor Shok, for found insight that basically provides the broader contextual issues and also the theoretical grounding. By 2050, democracy will be tested by forces already visible today: artificial intelligence, climate disruption, demographic transformation, migration, inequality, geopolitical fragmentation, declining trust in institutions, and the growing temptation of authoritarian efficiency. These are not distant challenges. They are already shaping how citizens experience power, representation, voice, and accountability. So, the central insight I wish to offer is this: that democracy in 2050 cannot be sustained by elections alone. And I think this has already been alluded to. It must be sustained by institutions that anticipate change, adapt to complexity, deliver public value, and remain accountable to citizens. So for many societies, especially in the global south, the democratic promise that often has been often reduced to periodic elections. I must state that elections remain indispensable. They are the core mechanism through which citizens confer and withdraw authority. But elections alone without institutional integrity, social justice, civic freedom, and meaningful participation can produce what some have called electoralism, the outward appearance of democracy without its substantive democratic spirit. I would like to frame my remarks around 5 insights, which I would draw from the background paper that International published earlier in 2026 on reimagining democracy in the global south: concepts, challenges, and emerging opportunities. The paper is available on IDEA website, and it's a product of a high-level dialogue uh, that we convened at International IDEA in Pretoria in South Africa in June 2025 on the theme Reimagining Democracy Global South. The first insight is that democracy in 2050 must be rooted in context. You'll acknowledge that one of the strongest lessons from the global south is that democratic systems cannot simply be transplanted without regard to history, culture, political economy, and social structure. Many post-colonial societies, mostly in Africa, inherited institutions that were formerly democratic, but not always socially rooted. The result has often been a gap between constitutional promise and lived experiences. This does not mean, abandoning universal democratic values. Participation, accountability, transparency, pluralism, representation, rule of law, and protection of rights remain essential. But the institutional expression of those values must speak local realities. In Africa, for example, debates on consensus, community consultation, restorative justice, traditional authority, and feminist democratic practice remind us that democracy must be more than advisory party competition. In Latin America, the principle of is it beyond vivir and experiments with participatory budgeting show that democracy can be grounded in community well-being, redistribution, and citizen deliberation. In Asia, if we can pull experiences from South Korea, Indonesia, and Mongolia, demonstrate how technology can support public engagement and transparency when it is embedded in accountable governance. The lesson is clear. By 2050, democratic innovation must be rooted in universal principles, but designed through local legitimacy. The second insight, democracy in 2050 must deliver, not merely declare. So the future legitimacy of democracy will depend on whether citizens see democratic governance improving their lives, that is, delivering on democratic dividends. Across many countries, disillusionment has grown where democracy has failed to deliver livelihoods, employment, public services, security, and justice. This is particularly urgent in youthful societies. Africa's demographic profile is instructive. With a very young population, the continent's democratic future will be shaped by whether young people experience democracy as a pathway to dignity and opportunity, or as a closed system managed by aging elites and exclusionary institutions, where young people are locked out of decision making, employment, and public influence. They will not wait patiently for institutions to reform themselves. They will mobilize digitally, socially, and at times in the streets. The events in Africa and elsewhere show that youth-led popular movements are becoming central democratic actors. They are not always formally organized, and they may not always fit conventional institutional categories, but they are powerful expressions of democratic demand. For democracy in 2050, the question is therefore not whether citizens participate once in every electoral cycle. The question is whether institutions create continuous channels for participation, feedback, accountability, and co-creation of policies. The third insight, democracy in 2050 must build institutions that are resilient to manipulation. Democratic decline often happens legally, gradually, and institutionally. Constitutions may remain in place, elections may continue, parliaments may sit, courts may function, and yet democratic substance may be hollowed out. Elections commissions may be captured, courts may be pressured, oversight institutions may be starved of resources. Media may be intimidated, civil society may be regulated into silence. Digital spaces may be surveilled or polluted with disinformation. This is why institutional design matters. We need election management bodies with independence, competence, and public trust. We need courts insulated from political pressure. We need parliaments that exercise oversight rather than merely ratify executive preference. We need anti-corruption bodies protected from partisan interference. We need political finance regimes that prevent money from capturing public policy. We need political parties that are democratic internally, not only as competitors externally. The fourth insight, democracy in 2050 must govern technology before technology governs democracy. Artificial intelligence, digital technologies will profoundly shape the future of democracy. Can expand participation, improve public service delivery, detect corruption, support electoral administration, and create channels for citizens' engagement. But they can also enable mass surveillance, algorithm discrimination, deepfakes, micro-targeted manipulation, automated propaganda, and new forms of exclusion. The issue is not whether technology is good or bad for democracy. The issue is whether democratic institutions have the capacity, laws, and ethical frameworks to govern technology in public interest. By 2050, the integrity of elections may depend as much on cybersecurity, data protection, and platform accountability as on ballot papers and polling stations. Public trust may depend on whether citizens know when they are interact with human beings or machines. Equality may depend on whether AI systems reinforce old biases or help correct them. Sovereignty may depend on whether states and citizens can govern data, rather than surrender its entirety to private or geopolitical power. So this calls for new generation of democratic safeguards, digital rights frameworks, transparent AI regulation, independent oversight of algorithm systems, protection of privacy, civic education for the digital age, and strong rules against online political manipulation. So democracy in 2050 must be technologically enabled, but not technologically captured. The fifth and last insight from the background paper is that democracy in 2050 must renew social contract. So at the heart of democratic discontent is a broken or a weakened social contract. And I think you can attest to this when you look at the events happening globally. So citizens ask, what do we owe the state? What does the state owe us? How is power exercised? How are resources distributed? How are differences mediated? How are future generations protected? So a future-oriented democracy must answer these questions, honestly. It must move beyond short-term political incentives and electoral cycles. Climate change, demographic pressure, inequality, digital transformation, and migration cannot be governed through short-termism. They require institutions capable of long-term thinking. This is where the idea of democracy in 2050 becomes especially powerful. Asks leaders to govern beyond the next election, to build institutions that anticipate risk, to design policies that protect future generations and ensure that democracy delivers inclusion, peace, resilience, and sustainable development. In practical terms, this means embedding foresight capacity in public institutions. It means using citizens' assemblies, participatory budgeting, youth councils, deliberative platforms, and inclusive constitutional review processes. It means ensuring that women, young people, minorities, persons with disabilities, and marginalized communities are not only represented symbolically, but are able to shape decisions substantively. So cosmetic inclusion will not sustain democracy. Meaningful power sharing will. Allow me to conclude with three positions. The first is that democracy in 2050 must be deeper than elections. Elections authorize government, but participation, accountability, rights, delivery, and trust sustain democracy. The second is that democracy in 2050 must be more adaptive than the crisis it faces. Institutions must be capable of learning, anticipating, correcting, and innovating. The third is that democracy in 2050 must be more human than the technologies that will shape it. AI may process information faster than citizens, but it cannot, replace a human dignity, public reason, moral judgment, and collective, self-government. So the future of democracy will not be secured by nostalgia or from old models. It will be secured by courageous institutional imagination. It will be secured by systems that are locally legitimate, globally connected, technologically responsible, socially inclusive, and developmentally effective. So if democracy is to thrive in 2050, it must become the form of government best able, the best form of governance, best able to answer the defining question of our time. How do diverse societies live together, share power fairly, resolve conflicts peacefully, protect the vulnerable, and govern the future responsibly? This is the task before us, and it is also the opportunity we have. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Graham, for those very interesting remarks. And I would encourage everyone to read that report, Reimagining Democracy in the Global South, at an International Ideas website. I will now hand it over to Mr. Panda, who will also be joining us online, I believe. I did before, but I can read it again. I think we read the bio in the beginning.
We have a bit of a technical issue with Panda sir. What happened? We are still sorting out, but we are connecting him shortly. Please, Emma, take over in meanwhile.
So apologies, we're having a bit of technical difficulties, but in the meantime, while we wait for Mr. Panda to join us, we will be playing a short video. I believe it is by our colleague Alberto Fernandez Gibia, who will, it's about AI and technologies. I haven't seen the video myself, but I'm looking forward to seeing it now. Apologies, everyone. We are still waiting to be connected.
Hello, can you
Oh,
hear me?
perfect. Okay. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, my apology for the system. I think, am I echoing? Is it okay?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay. First of all, good morning from Stockholm, and my apology for these technical hiccups. I think whenever I have cut via WebEx from India and between India and you, there is a problem. There is a technical problem. My apology, and but let me start by congratulating IITM and also Director General Sri Rakesh Bommaji. Great meeting you online again, sir. And I think this is a very good initiative, and this webinar is really timely given the kind of discussion that is happening around the world, not only on the state of democracy in India, but also the state of democracy worldwide. So my pleasure with also share my thoughts with this distinguished panel. Let me start by making these remarks that if we talk about democracy, I think democracy, the word democracy still remains the most legitimate political order in the 21st century. And this is primarily because it derives authority from public consent, accountability, participation, and institutional balance rather than any kind of coercion or centralized control that we see in other countries. And I think that's the distinction about about hello. Yeah, that's the distinction about the word democracy. Now, if we see also what is happening throughout the world, particularly in the global politics today, I think despite of all of those global turbulences that we are seeing, and there is that still comes to the core that whether democracy or the non-democratic medium of participation in the political process are the best model. And the debate is so divided that we often tend to confuse ourselves by saying that democracy may not be the best medium. But if we see and take into account all those global turbulences that is happening today, no alternative governance model has achieved comparable success or global legitimacy that the model of a democracy has itself attended or achieved all this while. So, therefore, democracy remains the most legitimate political order as of today in the 21st century. Now, coming to the theme of our panel today, the future of democracy towards 2020, 2050 will, of course, will depend less on exporting Western liberal models and more on adapting democratic governance to local culture, civilizational traditions, and developmental realities, especially across the global south that Director General Sri Burma was really mentioning about. I think that global south reference model is the most appropriate thing because all this while we have been talking democracy in the context of Western and non-Western context. But there is a global South parameter is emerging, and it's emerging quite fast, where the issues like local cultures, civilizational tradition, and developmental realities needs to be taken into account. The global South is increasingly shaping also the democratic debates. For example, if we take into the countries from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America, and these countries are no longer passive recipients of democratic ideas the way they used to be, let's say, 30, 40 years back. In fact, some of these countries from global south, be it from Asia, Africa, or from Latin America, they are becoming active contributors to the redefinition of democratic norms, representation, and governance. So, therefore, we could say that democracy and development are not contradictory to each other. The old argument that authoritarian systems deliver faster growth is increasingly being questioned because as many centralized regimes face structural economic slowdown, social distrust, debt crisis, and democratic pressures. And there is no better example about this than in China. What in China we are seeing, there is a highly controlled authoritarian system which is existing under under the Chinese Communist Party, and there you will see there is a economic slowdown has happened. There is a social distrust has risen. Many debt crises are coming to the forefront, and most importantly, there is a demographic pressure arising in China. In fact, if you see and go to the regions like Xinjiang, Tibet, many other regions of China, this is quite clearly visible. In fact, there is a huge gap between urban and rural China. Democracy is unable to the authoritarian systems are unable to address such kind of differences between urban and rural realities. So therefore democracy offers a long-term political resilience because it allows institutional corrections, leadership transition, public criticism, and public adaptability. All of these issues are missing in the authoritarian system like in China, where the Chinese Communist Party really dictates. They don't have local elections. Can we imagine in India, almost in every second or third month, or in every half year, there is an election happening? That's the success story of India. We don't really see that existing in China. Rural election does not really exist in China. Authoritarian systems may appear efficient in short term, but often become rigid and vulnerable in times of crisis. And this is what we are noticing in China. So, in comparison to China, India presents one of the most significant democratic experiments of the modern era. Managing extraordinary linguistic, religious, unique democratic framework gives India a unique global relevance. Compared to authoritarian systems such as China, India's democratic frameworks provides greater societal legitimacy, open debate, entrepreneurial freedom, judicial review, and public participation. These factors create sustainable innovation and long-term political stability. So if we talk about 2025, by 2025, the competition between democratic and authoritarian governance models may increasingly center on technological governance, AI regulations, digital freedom, and data and I must take this opportunity, therefore, to compliment the Election Commission of India to successfully, making the India's electoral machinery quite digital. So therefore, democracies must ensure that technological advancements does not erode civil liberties, and this is what something which we are seeing in other countries, and that is that is where the electoral systems of democratic systems, democratic countries needs to really take care. The other aspects is that the peace aspects. Democracy and peace are deeply interconnected. Democratic systems generally create institutional mechanisms for negotiation, compromise, conflict management, and peaceful political transition, reducing the likelihood of violent internal instability. In fact, international peace and stability require stronger democratic cooperation. Democracies must therefore work collectively to strengthen rules-based order, maritime security, cyber governance, climate cooperation, and economic transparency. And I think with India's leadership in IDEA International, some of these areas really need collaborations worldwide. The other issue is how the multilateral institutions are quite closely linked with the democratic mediums of working and democracies themselves. Global institutions such as the United Nations, United, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund must become more representative by 2050 through democratic countries' representation and the leaders from global south countries making into these institutions. Without greater inclusion of global south, international institutions risk losing their legitimacy, and this is a critical facet that we should not really overlook. The future of democracy also depends on economic inclusion, and I think that is one of the important aspects. which is missing in China. Rising inequality, unemployment, corruption, and exclusion weakens democratic trust. And this is what happening under the Chinese Communist Party. And we should not really, see all of those developmental models within China as a reference point, therefore. And we should not really blindly accept all of those developmental packages that the Chinese Communist Party is offering. So it is the economic inclusion, equality, and providing, employment opportunities and also participation across all those societies uh, are important facets of democracies. So therefore, democracies must deliver not only political freedom but also social mobility and economic opportunities. My last couple of points are, I think climate change and sustainability are also critical facets and very closely linked with democracies. In fact, if we talk about the central democratic challenges by 2050, then we need to also address climate challenges that is emerging worldwide. Democratic governance must demonstrate that open societies can effectively manage climate adaptation, energy transition, food security, and environmental justice. And I think this is where India also needs to learn a lot, and many democratic countries worldwide needs to learn from Sweden. You know, I am based here in Sweden for last 5 years. I must say that Sweden is a fantastic country when it comes to climate adaptation, energy transition, going for renewable energy, food security, and when it comes to environmental justice. Sweden is one of the leading country in the world politics today, and therefore many democratic countries should learn from Sweden how to really, make climate change and sustainability as a part of the democratic process. I would conclude by saying that also democracies must become much more participatory and digitally connected. Future democratic governance will require greater citizen engagement through digital platform, local governance structures, and youth participation, and transparent policy communications. So therefore, I will conclude by saying that reimagining democracy for 2050 ultimately means building systems that combines freedom, stability, technological innovation, and sustainability, along with human dignity. So, therefore, the future global order is more likely to be stable and peaceful when democratic values and evolved inclusivity rather than remaining geographically and ideologically confined, which is the case of China. So, therefore, we should not really follow the Chinese model on a blind, and we must see the successful democratic practices around the world, and learn from each other. I would stop here and thank and compliment IIIDM for this webinar and for taking over this crucial topic at a crucial time of discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jagannath Panda. We will now move to the Q&A. Oh, sorry. Aha, okay. Sorry. We will now be showing the video that we were previously about to show by Alberto on AI and technologies, I believe.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here, at least virtually, for now. Let me start with a prediction. That sounds pessimistic, but it's meant to be clarifying. The problems of democracy in 2050, what we are going to be discussing in 2050, will look a lot like the problems of democracy today. We will still be talking about mistrust in institutions. We will still be talking about inequality, about the sense that the economy works for some people and not for others, the sense that there is no meritocracy in the system. We will have geopolitical tensions, maybe different ones. It will be a world probably organized around rivalry rather than cooperation, even though we have been struggling and fighting for one built on cooperation. None of that is going to be a way in 2050. But if anything, the durability of these problems is the point. There are structurals, and we have not solved them in today. However, what changes in 2050 is the environment in which these problems take place. it will be operating under systemic stresses that we are only beginning to feel now. Climate change is the obvious one. A democracy managing migration, food prices spiraling out of control, and disasters on a warming planet is a democracy under permanent strain. Strained institutions make worse decisions and command less trust. People see that political action doesn't have an effect. But I want to spend most of my time on the second systemic force, because I think we still misunderstand it, and also because I know a little bit more about it, and that force is artificial intelligence. I want to reframe a little bit the idea. We tend to treat artificial intelligence as a communications technology, the same way the internet was a communications technology. It's something that changed the way information moves, how messages are spread, who can reach whom. And because of that, we tend to think about deepfakes, synthetic video, and the fear of not knowing what is real, what is not real, the liar's dividend, all these type of things. And that's true. I mean, that things are going to happen. But it's probably not the type of problem we will be thinking about in 2050. The fear captures an interesting part of what is happening, but not the full theme. AI is not a communication technology. It's a cognitive technology, and that changed quite a lot the landscape. It's not only moving information around. It sits inside the process in which we think, in the way we form our ideas, our judgment, the way we argue with each other, the way we decide. When a citizen asks a model to make a policy, when public official drafts a regulation with one AI model, when a party tests its message through one, technology is no longer carrying our thoughts from one place to another. It is participating in them. It is shaping them. It might be even deciding them. That has consequences for democracy that run deeper than a single deepfake. Democracy, at the end of the day, is a system for thinking in public. It's a system to solve public problems through debate. How a society reasons together, disagrees, and reaches decisions it can live with. That's what democracy is all about. That's why we have institutions like universities, like the free media, like open public debate, online and offline. Those are mechanisms we use to solve our disagreements. If the tools we use to reason are shaped somewhere else by a handful of systems trained on objectives we did not set, then the substance of self-government, it's been moving somewhere. The question is not whether we will be fooled by a fake video. The question is which ideas will make it into the debate and how. It is which ideologies get surface, which ones are more common, capable of running through the black box of artificial intelligence. It is the range of what we can think together and what type of discussions we can have together. So the stakes are high. They're about our cognitive capacity. And that's where democracy actually lives, in key institutions that are about debate and discussion. Let me finish with the last idea, which is about time and about control. If AI is going to shape how we think and decide, then democracy needs to decide and have a say on how it's built. And we're running out of time. The technology is consolidating faster than our institutions are adapting. And the technology stack is being built without democracy's involvement. I like to think of the stack of 4 layers. At the bottom, we have semiconductors, the physical chips that make any of this possible, and data centers and the hardware. Above that is data, the raw material AI system need to learn from. On top of that, we have foundation models, Claude, ChatGPT, DeepSeek, the models that where we are placing all of our focus. And on top of that, the applications, the concrete uses of AI, the use of AI to manage traffic, or to decide who gets social support from the state. Right now, decisions at every level of one of these layers are being made on commercial and geopolitical logic, with democracy values not really entering the picture, or entering very late. And I think that's the work we have in front of us for 2050, among many other things. Democracy has not inserted its values into each layer of the stack, and it needs to do so. What data can be used? What terms? Who owns the models? What are the safeguards of those models? What applications are allowed to do? How can citizens engage with this? Who owns the hardware part of artificial intelligence? These are not technical questions. These are political questions. It's about power, and it's about democracy. We don't have until 2050 to find a solution. The time is rather running out. So I welcome this reflection to start thinking, how do we want to look back in 2050 and say we did the right thing? Thank you very much, and I wish the best for the day.
Okay, excellent. I think we are at time, but I think we can probably afford 15 minutes for Q&A. So if there are any questions in the room, we can take those. For those online, our Triple IDM colleague will read out the questions that come online. Yes? Do we have a microphone?
So, thank you very much. Very interesting presentations. My question as well as comment also. So, when we look at utopia versus imagination, is it the same, or we like to make a distinction? To me, it appears that utopia of whom? Is it a collective or some individual's utopia? On the other hand, if you look at imagination, actually it is grounded epistemologically. We have writings in sociology and other disciplines where it is about a consciousness. We consciously, it is not a dream, it is a consciousness, it is a collective. So this is my reflections. Secondly, second question is about democracy is not something, a singular process, it is a multi-scalar. So if nation is a autocrat or there is a national democracy, does not mean there will be local democracy. Why I am asking this? This is again in relation to question on China. There were a lot of talk on that. How cities of China are managed, that is one of the things. Because nation manifests in cities, and cities are the drivers of the nation. So the democracy, decentralized way, what I know about China, that the decentralization, and democracy has two pillars. One is governance, other is planning. If planning fails, governance fails, democracy will fail. And that is what we see at the level of the city. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Professor, would you like to take this first question, especially the first part of utopia?
No, I would try to answer both of these questions and then leave enough time for others to respond if they wish to. The first thing, yes, I take it that that there is a distinction, and yet at some level there is also a kind of a a convergence between utopia and imagination. I usually take imagination to be a very an individual's act, and it's not necessary unless and until we talk about social imaginaries and all that. But utopias are more grounded in philosophical literature, chiefly because of the various experiments people have done on the question of utopia or of trying to expand it, but largely trying to speak about collective visions. And especially if you talk about a particular community's utopia, and that is how communitarianism, as if there is a strong slant of communitarianism in utopia, and which is where the fault lines lie, as I was trying to speak about. So it is with regard to the collective visions that I think I'm trying to bring in the idea of utopia closer. So imagination, I would leave it aside for the moment, though, but these technical differences may not matter much. There can be imaginations, let us say, of the common good. One of the phrases in democracy that is much debated is that who frames for me what is the common good? Who decides for me what is the national interest? Why don't I have a say in envisaging or in trying to imagine what the national good is or what the common good is, and what is my role in trying to speak? So that is where I think there is a class between utopias, and that is what I was trying to bring my attention to in my talk. Though there would be other versions of the same in the 20th century, and 21st century has had a more sobering impact on the idea of utopia itself, as especially when it tries to align with democratic practicalities. What can practically happen within democracy? Coming down to the second question on, that democracy is multiscalar. I completely take this point. In fact, even with regard to China, I would say that at the local level, there is a lot of this, scope for people to deliberate on questions of planning, reforms, and all those things. However, I might cite a good friend of mine, Bao Gang-he, who has actually written on deliberative democracy in China, and he's one of those experts, but though he teaches in Australia. Now, my problem with that model is not that I don't accept it, but I think that the two pillars of democracy are, one is participation and the other is contestation. Right? Participation, just mere participation, doesn't tell us about the success of any democracy. If a system doesn't allow contestation to take place, and by contestation we mean that even those who can oppose the government in power, whether or not there are enough opposition parties. So the presence of opposition parties, a diverse civil society, makes for contestation, on which ground I think China is a very poor candidate, either at the local level or at the national level. So those deliberations that take place even at the localized levels in China are work within very constrained political spaces. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will just double check with our online panelists, Graham or Dr. Panda, if you would like to respond to that or add anything.
Yes, on the China question, I think how the cities are managed or how the local governance models are managed. You see, we have to look at the electoral system. It's much more centralized, party controlled, and it is hierarchical. And therefore, what we have seen, the cities are controlled by agencies. They are not necessarily the institutions of the government. They are controlled by the agencies of the party. As we know, in China, there are dual structure of governance exist. One is the party governance model, one is the government governance model. So I think the Chinese cities are very much controlled by the Chinese Communist Party agents. And the agencies of the Communist Party, they monitor and evaluate the city progresses, the developmental packages and all, because that is critical to the survival of the Chinese Communist Party. And if you see, the Chinese Communist Party actually survived because of the economic growth that it calibrated all this while over the last 3 decades or so. And the magic behind this was you allow the state-owned enterprises, those are they are primarily controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, and then you offset. But unlike in India, we have a federal structure. The cities are autonomous, and the governance models are autonomous. No matter how much the central government wants to control, the state government in power can always, still can have the same in terms of the developmental model they want to really bring out in the different cities or in the different states. So therefore, resilient model in comparison to China. Why the success of the Indian cities have not really come to that far of China? Because we are a massively complex society. The social structure of India is very complex. It is the linguistic, it is the religious sentiments, and it is also the demographic regions of India that is tested on each and every model of governance. That is not really tested in China. So therefore, the Chinese cities have developed par excellence in comparison to import model, but we should not really follow that model because that would not really be applied and excelled in our kind of system. Our kind of system does have a checks and balances, which really lacks in the Chinese context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Panda. I don't think do we have time for one more? No, I'm very sorry because we have to wrap this session up, but I would just like to sincerely thank all the panelists. I think there were some really interesting discussions about the importance of governing technology before it governs us, about fostering mechanisms that foster disagreements, and building systems that are tailored to local contexts. So with that, thank you again, and we will now move on to our next session.